Dobro večer, gledate Otvoreno studio. Ja sam Borjan Jovanovski i u ovo izdanje na Otvoreno studio ja imam često da vi го представам пратеникот на грчкиот парламент и председавач на Комитетот за надворешна политика и одбрана, професорот Костас Дузинас, меѓу другото познат и како интелектуалец во глобални рамки, особено по неговото дело, неговата книга за човековите права и империите. Тоа е насловот на таа книга. Mr. Kozias, welcome in our studio.
I'm Duzinas, not Kozias.
Duzinas, of course.
Yeah. Kozias is a great friend of mine, but he's a bit larger than me.
So, welcome, Mr. Duzinas, to in our studio. And let's start with the Prespa agreement. Sure. You are one of the, let's say, one of the intellectuals and politicians now involved in promotion of the Prespa agreement. So the letter of the Prespa agreement is implemented, but still the spirit of the Prespa agreement to be implemented. Sure. So do you think that Prespa agreement is just a good idea which will be destroyed by the opposition in both countries?
No, it will not. First of all, let me say thank you very much, Borjan, and for inviting me at your program, and of course, happy birthday to your station.
Thank you.
And I think we are going through an extremely important period of time. As you said, the Prespa agreement, we call it the Prespa agreement, but let's not have a fight over the name.
Not again.
Not again. Not again. Was and is an extremely important agreement, obviously for the two countries, for Greece, for North Macedonia, but I think for the wider region, for the Balkans, it creates a window of opportunity. It gives a momentum, I think, that I hope will be adopted. The spirit will be adopted by other major problems we have in the region. We know them. I think we have created something which is unique for our two countries, for Europe, for Balkans, for Europe, for the world. So I'm starting from that. As a philosopher, let's say, I would say that the basis of this agreement is a great principle in our societies, the principle of respect for the dignity of the other party. Something which is important in personal relations, but of course in our case it was important in terms of international relations, in terms of finishing this long and festering problem in a way that I think makes both people feel that they may have given something, they may have taken something, but it creates the basis from which we can move together towards joint shared economic development, political collaboration, of course cultural collaboration at all levels, cultural events, universities, research and so on. Will it succeed? Will it succeed? It is our job to make it succeed.
Still, I mean, it's a nice explanation of the spirit of Prespa agreement, but still, the majority of the citizens in both countries still oppose the Prespa agreement. How to make them understand what you're saying?
Sure. So this is our job. This is our job to make them understand what happened and what are the advantages for both people from this agreement. So let me start by putting it like this. We, on the Greek side, as a party of the left, therefore a party that was always committed to internationalism, to good neighborly relations, to having the best possible type of deals with our neighbors, first of all believed, and I think the same applies to your government, on that value, on the principle that I explained earlier, that mutual respect, accepting the dignity of the other person. But secondly, we did a cost-benefit analysis. On top of that philosophical analysis, it was an analysis, calculation of the advantages and the disadvantages. And if you look at the disadvantages for both our countries over the last 30 years, they were big, of a different kind, but we were losing symbolic capital. You were being stopped by being introduced in international organizations and taking the full advantage of a good relationship in the world. If you look at the economic benefits, if you look at the benefits of all kinds of collaboration in the energy field, in the research, in the cultural field, in the defense and security field, which is terribly important. So if you do that kind of logical analysis, it is very clear that both our values and the interests of our two people will move in that direction. So what can you do with those people who still believe that this is a bad deal? The first job to do, and this is something that we have to do in Greece as well, is to explain to people that logical argument. Sort of what are the advantages on this and the other side? What were the disadvantages if we were to continue down that road that we've been going all those decades, and which had become an impasse? There was no way out. There was no exit from that situation unless two, I think, talented and forward-looking leaderships were prepared to do this thing. But secondly, and we have to accept that, nation and nationalism has been a major force in world politics, a major force in creating states, giving a sense of identity to people, and therefore it cannot be dismissed easily. Obviously, nationalism is something that looks mainly to emotions, to the affective side of the human personality. Of course, to logical arguments, to historical arguments, to examining what happened in the past, but there is that emotional thing. And we have to speak to those people. I cannot, and I should not, and I will never dismiss people who are against the agreement just because they're against. I will not call them extreme right-wingers just because they were outside Parliament and they were shouting against us. Of course, there are small groups who are extreme right-wing fascists. I mean,
do you have a same division in your society between the traitors and people who are traitors and people who are protecting national interests?
The patriots, yes.
Patriots.
Of course we have that. Of course we have that. This is the very interesting thing about nationalism, because the Greek nationalism and the North Macedonian nationalism are two sides of the same coin. It is very interesting because we have been attacked as being traitors for giving up, for surrendering the name. And your politicians be attacked for being traitors, but also surrendering the name. Now, if you put those two types of arguments next to one another, they cancel each other. They're totally against each other. They're the opposite arguments. And this is the problem with nationalism. That nationalism, listen, I'm a patriot. For me, a patriot is someone who loves his or her home country, but does not hate our neighbors. The extreme nationalists, and I wouldn't say that all nationalists are of that type. The extreme nationalists are people who somehow believe that they are God's elect nation, and that every neighbor, everyone who in any way challenges their own nation is an enemy and has to be combated. Now, again, let me repeat that that kind of emotional argument has great importance, has to be taken seriously. In other words, when we explain to people the logical, the historical, the economic arguments in favor of the Prespa Agreement, arguments which are absolutely overwhelming. I don't think that any logical person who, in an unbiased way, sits down and sees what is happening, what are the consequences of this, would not agree that this is a good thing. But on the other hand, we have to speak to the soul. We have to speak to the heart of people also.
We know that opposition in your country is very much opposed to the Prespa Agreement. On the other hand, recent polls in Greece are showing that Nea Demokratia will form the new government. So it means that by the end of this year, it's very much possible that we are going to have a different political reality in Greece. And having in mind that the Prespa Agreement is still very fragile, what is destiny in these circumstances?
Sure. Let me start by disputing the fact that Nea Demokratia is going to be the next government. I think Syriza will be the next government. Mr. Tsipras will continue being the prime minister. But of course,
I'm just saying what the poll shows.
Sure. Well, I should tell you that in 2015, we won 2 elections and a referendum. even the exit polls in the referendum and in the second election were saying, the exit polls, not opinion polls in advance, the exit polls, were saying that the no that the government, Syriza was supporting, would be either 1 point ahead or 1 point behind the yes. In the 2015 September elections, the polls were saying all the way that New Democracy will win. However, as a working hypothesis...
Let's take this hypothetical
as a working hypothesis,
scenario.
yes.
Yeah.
Sure, sure. Again, two answers. My first answer is this. Both on grounds of principle, it seems to me that this was such a good agreement for both parties that we should have done it irrespective of the electoral outcome. If all politicians become cynics, if all politicians basically just look to the next election and decide what they're going to do just looking at the next election, basically our politics would be much poorer than what they are. Of course we have to look at the next election. Of course we have to do the job of explaining to people why we did it and so on. Now, if New Democracy wins, there I have to say that over the last few months we did observe a certain cynicism, because the position that the Greek government, Mr. Koutsias, Mr. Tsipras, adopted in relation to the nay was a position that was developed by the right-wing government, by the Foreign Secretary, Mrs. Dora Bakoyanni, who is the sister of the current leader of the New Democracy. It was presented in the United Nations by Mr. Venizelos, who was the Foreign Secretary under the PASOK government. Therefore, we did not do anything different from what was being said to the Greek people as the official, public, governmental position. We did nothing different from that. Obviously, there were details that needed to be discussed. And it was, for me anyway, extremely disappointing that talking to people who were working for the Foreign Relations Department of New Democracy, who privately were telling us that, you know, okay, we may disagree on this, on that, but on the whole, is a good agreement. And then they came out mainly because of electoral calculations against it.
The question is whether the New Democracy and the opposition now in Greece, once in power, are they going to obstruct the implementation of the Prespa agreement or just to, let's say, ignore? I mean, that's what we would like to know.
My hope and my wish and my expectation is that as a responsible government, once they abandon the kind of rhetoric we see nowadays coming up to the European elections, the local elections, and then the national elections, they will abandon that, and as a responsible government, there is a continuity in the state, and they will, I think, continue dealing in good faith. This is my hope.
You know that one of the main reasons for us to accept this agreement was to find a way out towards European integration processes, because we were stuck.
Sure.
So it's very important for us to be supported by Greece in our path towards European Union. As we see, the Prime Minister Tsipras is supporting very much North Macedonia government to start the negotiation for membership in European Union. Could we expect that Mitsotakis government will do the same?
Again, you know, I have to go by what are the public statements of the opposition currently, and those public statements are to the effect that we will fully follow and honor the terms of the agreement. However, we will be quite attentive and quite cautious to see that not just the spirit, but also the letter of the agreement is being proposed, and then they're making some idle threats that, of course, we will use our power within the European Union to make sure that, you know, sort of the chapters of the enlargement process, of the accession process, will be opened and closed when we feel that things are going well. Again, I think this is kind of a position that, in a sense, every government may say that, you know, you have how many? About 26, 27 chapters that need to be opened and then to be closed once the Commission says that all the elements have been completed. And of course, at that point, this is the current position of the European Union, all member states have a vote. But this is normal political life in the European Union. However, I think it is important to state, and I am one of the people from the Greek side, from the Greek parliament, not government, who on every occasion when I meet my European companions, only recently in Bucharest, I gave a keynote speech in the Interparliamentary Conference of the Committees of Foreign Relations, and my main message and the main message of the Greek government is that the North Macedonian government has done quite a few of the reforms that were asked of them, that they need also to see that all these difficult reforms that they still have to be completed and so on have a clear recognition, acknowledgement by the Europeans. Because there is a fear that despite what Greece and other countries may say, the European Union at this point is going through such a big existential crisis at all fronts.
That will be my one of my next questions. Yeah. But let me ask you personally, how difficult for you was to intellectually, both and politically, to support Prespa agreement?
Intellectually,
in Greece.
Intellectually, it was perhaps the best moment of my political life. I mean, I came to politics in 2015. I was professor in London for 40 years. I moved from London and the university to Athens and politics, and it was a very difficult transitional period. Still is a transitional period. In my latest book, I call myself an accidental politician. But as an accidental politician who had the great honor to be elected as the chair of this important committee, I can say that irrespective of what happens in the next elections, certainly to me, whether I get elected or not, the Prespa agreement, as you say, intellectually, in terms of values, in terms of the analysis of international politics, in terms of the analysis of geopolitics in the area, was the best thing that have been involved in my political life. It is the great legacy that this government will leave behind, irrespective of what happens. Politically, it was difficult. When I chair the committee meeting that goes through the ratification process, and I have every single opposition party, all 6 opposition parties, basically involved in an auction of super patriotism and indeed extreme right-wing nationalism from the borders of the political spectrum, is very difficult sitting there and being bullied and attacked and so on. But at the end of the day, I lived in London for 40 years. I have an element of the British stoical attitude, so I went through it okay.
We see, the visit of Mr. Tsipras is showing clearly his willingness to support the development of the bilateral relation. But people, some businessmen, for example, the economic chamber, trade chamber from North Greece, is already started to oppose the effort of Tsipras government. How do you comment this?
I mean, the particular person who made these statements, the chair of the Thessaloniki Chamber of Commerce, I think showed one of the, what I would say, the rather unpleasant characteristics of politics. You know, they have a number of people in the opposition, in the mainstream media, have a line that Tsipras and Syriza is to blame for everything, from the original sin to the fact that yesterday we had bad weather. And in this situation, this gentleman, who I read in the press, his main business, he's a tourist agent, is sending Greeks to North Macedonia, goes out and makes these totally unacceptable statements. Listen, we started with this problem. It is a job that needs to be done. As far as I'm concerned, the Prespa agreement or the precipice for that agreement will succeed if and when the last reasonable, rational person in our both countries has said, okay, I perhaps was wrong, or I still believe that this was not the correct way to go about it, but the results of the agreement was good for both of us.
How do you comment, again as intellectual, maybe it's more interesting, the fact that nationalism in the Balkans still very much vibrant and present, despite the fact that there was many victims in recent history in the Balkans. So how to explain that people still believe in these nationalistic ideas and populist ideas?
How long do you have? In a sense, you know, you're posing a major question, which of course has occupied both political science and political philosophy, but also psychoanalytical versions of a political explanation. Because
should be a part of psychoanalytic.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, you know, just to say something very, very brief about psychoanalysis. One of the key ideas in psychoanalysis, of course, all of us, you know, sort of lack. You know, we're not really full persons, and there is this fantasy that's been created, nationalism, occasionally, particularly the romantic nationalism that we have in both our countries and, of course, in the Balkans, creates this sense that at some point in the long past, time immemorial, we were really a good, happy community. We were all together. We all had, you know, our proper national aim and individual success. And then something bad happened. An evil person, someone who was outside our community, came into the community and stole our enjoyment, stole our happiness. There was a thief, and this thief could have been some international conspiracy, the Jews for the Nazis, others in this or that other situation, the refugees, the immigrants. Because of course, you talked about nationalism in the Balkans, and it is quite, I think, upsetting. As you said, we had wars 30 years ago. But what about...
Hundreds of persons dead, children,
indeed,
women.
Indeed, indeed. What about Hungary? What about Poland? They have not received a single or very few immigrants. And then we have the leaders of those countries speaking about those wretched of the earth, particularly those people who come from Syria, from the war, people who had their families killed, their properties destroyed, and they speak as if these characters are coming to contaminate, to change the nature of their nation. So you see, that's why I mentioned psychoanalysis, because those wide and pretty general ideas like romantic nationalism have always a certain effect in your psyche. And in that situation, clearly you cannot believe that the Syrians who never got to Budapest somehow pose a threat. You see, nationalism, that kind of extreme nationalism we see now raising its ugly head in Europe and returning us to some ghosts that we felt were buried after the end of the Second World War. That kind of nationalism, unfortunately, was able to rise on an economic and social substrate of poverty, of inequality, of a sense of insecurity and anxiety about the future of the European peoples, which was partly the result of policies pursued both at the European Union level and in domestic governments. Now, these concerns are justified. But to become, justified concerns about the future of myself and my children, to become that kind of extreme nationalistic, hate-filled beliefs, both at the wider national level and individually, you have to have someone who comes and tells you there is an evil character. There is something evil that comes here to undermine this happy community that we never were.
Let's talk in a larger context about Europe. How do you explain the ongoing political crisis in Europe? Both traditional left and right are challenged by a very far right, or by some other political structure characterized by autocracy.
Illiberal democracy.
Yeah, illiberal democracy. Do we enter in a new political era in Europe, full of uncertainty?
In the world, I would say. I think we're in a transitional period in terms of world politics, the world balance of forces, in which what we used to call the West is now in a gradual decline. We see that in terms of economics, of capital moves from the West to the East. We see it in political terms, we even see it in military terms. And I think the Trump phenomenon, and of course the repetition, the mimicking of the Trump phenomenon in Europe, the attempt to create this black front, this black international in Europe, I think is partly the result that as we move gradually away from this kind of globalized neoliberalism to a new type of capitalism, which is not very clear how it's going to end up, what kind of shape it will have. I think frightened politicians and frightened people have abandoned this earlier idea, this cosmopolitan idea, this idea of creating a society of nations. And as you say quite rightly, they are returning to the idea of sovereignty, closed borders, the idea of creating states and peoples and nations that are like castles, like fortresses against the outside world. And it is in that climate which has, I believe, social and economic characteristics that extreme nationalism becomes the ideology of this period. You know, Antonio Gramsci said that, speaking about the late 20s Europe, the old has not died yet, the new has not been born. We live in the age of monsters.
Yeah. What are the chances for EU to find a way out of this obvious crisis, which wounded a substantial pillars of the European construction and wounded what we called European values,
sure,
including human rights?
Sure.
And you are very much famous by your theory about human rights.
Thank you.
So, do we expect that what we know as a European construction created after the Second World War is over, and we don't know what is going to happen?
What appears to be over, certainly, and Brexit is part of this process, is the end, whether temporary or more permanent, of what used to be known as the ever closer union, the move towards a certain economic, after the monetary, economic and then political integration. I think that is currently finished. The Germans were by far the most powerful nations, and economically and in every other sense, have made it clear, following the German Constitutional Court position, that they will not accept a move towards the United Nations of Europe, or the United States of Europe. The Brits, on the other hand, were always semi-detached. I would even say that Brexit today is, in a sense, the catastrophic posthumous victory of Mrs. Thatcher. Because the position of Mrs. Thatcher and of the British ruling class in the 80s and the 90s was this: whoever applies to become a member of the Union, we will support them. Because we're shopkeepers, we're good businessmen, we're into free trade, and therefore we need to have more markets to go into them. But secondly, by accepting, without any process of great convergence, countries that clearly diverge. They're very different from the Netherlands or from Germany or from France. You make sure that the political convergence would not take place. That was, it seems to me, the Thatcher idea. It ended up, however, in a sense, turning around and kicking the Brits on the face. But yeah, the crisis is, as you say, is
well, the question is whether this crisis is going to somehow, after all, is going to strengthen the European Union, or it's a beginning of a disruption of the European Union.
You know very well European affairs, and of course, one of the standard slogans whenever previous crises were taking place in Brussels, within the bureaucracy, was that the crisis will end up strengthening us. And I think they were saying something like that also at the beginning of the Eurozone crisis. At this point, I don't think that anyone in their right mind would say that this particular crisis, which is not a single, it is a multiple crisis. It is many and variable. The Eurozone crisis, the population flows crisis, the Brexit crisis, now the rise of the extreme right wing, which, as I said, is the superstructure, is the ideological addition to all this crisis. It seems to me that that goes far too deep to believe that in the immediate future or in the medium term, Europe will be strengthened. You know, you said about European values. Let us make it very clear. There were two basic values. The first was, after the end of the war, to make sure that competition between European nations will become economic competition. It will not be any longer a question of wars.
To stop to fight.
Yes,
one
that was the
against
first one. The second was prosperity for all the European peoples, which necessarily meant solidarity. That, in other words, the northern richer countries will help the southern countries in a process of convergence. So that we could move, all of us could move towards a middle European level of life. Now, this recent crisis has undermined both of these principles. The prosperity, look at Greece, look at Italy, look at Spain. Greece lost 27% of its GDP in 5 years, partly as a result of European policies. And then look at this idea of pacification, of creating a Europe of friends. We had the problems, as you said, in the Balkans, but we had exactly the same thing in relation to the Greco-German or German-Italian relations, and of course now with Brexit. The ugly nationalism has raised its head, and therefore it is not just about values. Of course we can talk about values, humanitarianism, good and human rights and all the rest of it. But those two pillars, prosperity with solidarity, end of wars, nationalist tensions, and all those kinds of ethnic divisions that could lead, indeed, eventually to war, as we had in the interwar period. Those two pillars are in retreat.
I heard many compliments for your yesterday presentation of your ideas presented in your famous book, Human Rights and Empire.
Yeah.
So you have started kind of academic cooperation with Professor Frčkovský.
Yes.
Could we expect that on various other levels we're going to have cooperation on a citizen movement level, cooperation between two countries, and it could be an example how to
absolutely, and that takes us back to the beginning of the discussion, because whatever people may feel now about the Prespes Agreement, and whatever I think openness they have to the opposing arguments, the real test, you know, the eating of the pudding, as we say, will come when cities will be twinned, when people will start traveling freely, when universities start putting together joint research programs, joint degrees, when the two parliaments, I was speaking on behalf of the Greek parliament, we have to create a new body of friendship between the two parliaments. When, in other words, people see the improvement in their everyday lives as a result, partly as a result of this agreement. This is again this is our job, this is the test, this is the big test of time. The agreement, in terms of international law, cannot be overturned, either by the new democracy in Greece or by your own opposition here. This is international law. It has happened, full stop. Whether, however, it works or not depends on whether those measures of implementation that hopefully will start being put into effect on Tuesday, when Prime Minister Tsipras and many other Greek politicians and businessmen, businesswomen visit Skopje, when they start putting now some flesh on the bones of the agreement. I feel I'm very optimistic about this. I'm very optimistic that we're entering a new period in our relations.
My last question I'm asking you in your capacity as a Brit citizen.
Sure.
You are a professor in a university in United Kingdom. So, a few words about Brexit. Do you think that Great Britain is leaving definitely European Union, or it's possible they will reconsider?
I think, if I was a betting man, I would say that there is a chance, a good chance, that we may have a no-deal Brexit, which will happen by default, because clearly the British Parliament has voted against the idea. But if there is no alternative, by default, it's a bit like, the timetable, sort of the time is running down, We were supposed to have the Brexit a couple of days ago, 29th of March. Now we have a bit of extra time in footballing terms until the 12th of April, perhaps until the 22nd of May. But the decision has been taken, and I think for very many people, including my friends in London and my students who want to see a second referendum, this is unlikely to happen. So the alternatives at the point are three. First, the worst, no-deal Brexit, not because a majority wants it, but because there is nobody to stop it by a better deal. The second is to have a change in the leadership of the Tory party. Mrs. May has offered to resign, hoping that this would get her a few more votes from her party's opposition. But again, there is no obvious alternative. There is no obvious end at the minute. And therefore, the third, and I think perhaps the most likely chance, if the Tories cannot find the Prime Minister, is to go to new elections. In a sense, to tell people, listen, democracy always has an answer. If we, the politicians, cannot do it, let's go to the people.
Okay, the time is running, and but I would like to have opportunity to have you again in my studio and to talk about human rights, which is your intellectual mark and your very provocative book, Human Rights and Empire. Mr. Douzias, thank you very much to be our guest, and
thank you very much, Boris. Thank you very much. We have a wonderful studio here. As I was saying at the beginning, I've been to various studios all over Europe and in Greece, and yours is really excellent. And I hope a good life, but mainly lots of viewers.
Thank you very much. Това беше Коста Douzias, пратеник на Сириза, председавач на Комитетот за надворешна политика и одбрана на грчкиот парламент. Ви благодарам за вниманието и останете со нас. Гледайте 1 TV.